Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, Higher and Beyond podcast. This is the place for us to learn about personal development, personal growth, and self improvement. Today, I have my guest speaker here with me. Hi,
Hello.
Alec. And yes, my guest speaker today is one of my biggest role model in my personal development journey. So he's also an author, educator, mentor, speaker, and master ecologist. As a mentor and coach, Alec is helping people with addiction, mental illness, and help other people live healthy, meaningful lives. So let's welcome Alec Wells. Thank you so much for being here in my show, Alec.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and you make me sound like quite an interesting person, so I'll come back.
Oh my God, it's my pleasure to have you here, and really, I want to learn from you, and I believe you have a lot of things that you can share to the world, and so I'm so curious about it.
Thank you.
um, Alec, you've been helping a lot of people. Also, personally, I've got a lot of help from you in my personally journey and my professional journey too. And we are friends in college. And thank you so much for everything and been helping me. And you're also my inspiration. And we talk a lot about self-awareness and things like that, and one thing that made me really curious talking about self-awareness, especially for building inner strength and resilience. Now, um, what does the self-awareness means to you, and why it is important for building inner strength and resilience?
Mm. Well, from my perspective, self awareness precedes all inner strength, and from inner strength comes personal resilience. We live in a world that is dominated by trauma, either people's understanding or belief that they have suffered a trauma, or constant mainstream media reinforcement of conflict, the state of the environment, and everything, all of those things that many of us feel like we have no control over. So you've referenced ecology, and I'm sure many of your listeners will have been aware of ecology and the message that that promotes, which is that personal um, empowerment breeds personal responsibility. In fact, that's the other way around, but I'm sure your listeners will have already identified that. And the situation that many people find themselves in is having to be mentally resilient, sometimes also physically resilient, without necessarily having any training. So we can think of resilience like a muscle, and our mind is like a muscle. If you train it and exercise it and you give it to something to work towards, then it will make leaps, and we will be in a greater position to deal with things that come to us. So, for instance, probably one of the most recognized definitions of trauma is that it's an external event that overwhelms physical and psychological coping mechanisms. Um, that came from somebody by the name of Van der Kolk in around about 1989. We often believe that trauma comes with intense helplessness, intense horror, intense fear. And as I already said, those are sorts of things that are very much promoted in mainstream media. We know that algorithms for certain social media channels lead us down this line. But the real key to any experience of trauma is what the person themselves experienced. We know that from our own personal representational systems, we will reinforce certain elements of an experience and we will discount other elements of an experience. So, really, in order to be resilient, we need a certain level of adversity to measure it against, and we ideally only find it of a level of difficulty that allows us to grow in much the same way as you would go to the gym and you would only shift a weight, or you would only run a distance that tests you but does not physically break you. So that's where I come into the self awareness, the inner strength, and the personal resilience from.
Hmm. With a lot of experience that you have and how you overcome the challenges in life, and it come from the trauma and things like that, because sometimes I found out that I thought I don't have the trauma, right? And I'm just like, no, there's something inside that we need to work on. How do you see from this?
Well, an external event is only potentially traumatic. So we know that
Okay.
some degree of stress is helpful. It's what helps provide drive. We know that pain points and pinch points in our life are also the motivators that help us to go on and conquer things, whether it be a personal fear, a challenge, some kind of life goal. So all of this means that our response to trauma or our appreciation of resilience is promulgated by our thinking patterns. It's the way we talk about it, the way we think about it, the way we behave. And yes, as you just said, sometimes there is something within us that we have absorbed and we have made of that whatever it might be. We also know that our minds layer up stories and events that have happened to us. We also know that we frequently only visit our most recent recollection of that event. So sometimes we make these events worse for ourselves, but it also gives us that unique ability to layer up a kinder, more compassionate, and sometimes even just more accurate picture of what actually happened. So lacking any amount of processing experience, lacking any support system, people that can help provide guidance with these things is another one of those elements that will either cause us to experience um, a traumatic event as a challenge to our resilience, or something that we take in our stride and power through, and it makes us stronger and healthier for oncoming events.
Mm, yeah. So this is why the self awareness also the key to make the person um, develop the inner strength and resilience. Because nowadays, if you want to, if you see, right? Well, I personally have, in in this society now, people are kind of fragile. It's not. Oh gosh, it's a lot of things happening in this world. It's hard to become resilient. How do you see from the self awareness to?
A lady by the name of Anne Maston said a number of years ago that it's the process of adapting well in the face of
Okay.
adversity, trauma, or tragedy, threats, and other significant stress conditions that really make the difference of being able to say we are resilient or that fragility. And I'm not by any stretch suggesting that um, yeah, this is something that is an individual's to deal with and that there's no compassion or empathy for them. But from my perspective, with my work, with what I try to accomplish in education and the messages that we definitely take from ecology, it's helping people to process and adapt in the face of those adversities that not only will help them in the short term, but much like the teaching a person to fish analogy, allows them to use the same processes and the same principles later on. Because if there's one thing we can guarantee, these these things aren't going to happen in a vacuum. It's not like we get one traumatic or resilience improving event and then we bounce back from it as if there was no other hardships in our lives and we just continue. We, again, with the gym analogy, we go, we become stronger and fitter. We use that when we next face some kind of adversity and challenge. Our resilience grows, our ability to deal with it more in our stride also grows. And, there's no automatic, this happened to me, I survived it, and so I am automatically stronger. It's something happened, I processed it and adapted to it, and now I'm better able to cope with the next problem that comes my way. So we can become extremely strong in our character, we can become very robust in our characters, but it doesn't alter the fact that we can be vulnerable at some point in the future to a maladaptive either coping strategy or not dealing well with something that lands on our plate.
Mm. Wow. To become resilient and to have the inner strength, it has to be, from the process and adaptability for having that attitude.
Exactly.
However, however, talking about the self awareness is not also come easily in the uh, each person, personally. So,
No.
what is the first step to help people, to become aware of themselves? Yeah.
I suppose the very first step is for the person to become curious, and
Okay.
that can happen from being in the company of others and identifying something that is beneficial to them. Um, you're thinking of mainstream psychology, Vygotsky's uh, proximal zones of learning. So, a child might be in a group with some older children who've developed slightly further than they have, and they will then incorporate those elements of play into their own play. Similarly, we can be around wiser, more mature people than ourselves, and we start to recognize their choices of wisdom, maturity, and character. And we can either become curious and try to go on that journey ourselves, or we actually ask. And what a powerful step that is to become curious and ask the question, what are you doing? How did you come to it? How can I learn it? So there has to be a willingness to grow, to develop, and to change. And certainly when we think about resilience, and I can't remember who said this, it'll come back to me, I'm sure, but it's not a fixed character trait. It will alter when our circumstances change and when the environment changes. So we may have experienced resilience in one way in our 20s or 30s. We might experience it differently as life events change. So parenthood, divorce, marriage, changes in jobs, all of these sorts of things that we know normally add stress to our lives, and as a result of that stress, challenge our resilience.
Mm. It means that people always find and always realize that self awareness will, through a lot of challenges, a lot of stress, such as kind of heartbreak, for example, or divorce, or changing job, and things like that.
Absolutely, and it's not on us as the skilled helper, the coach, the mentor, to make an assessment of that trauma, um, or the event. What is trauma for you would not be trauma for me, would not be trauma for the next person, and vice versa. So it goes back to that earlier comment I made that it is all down to the way that the person experiences it. And that will potentially change in every circumstance. The great thing about the personal growth and self development journey is that it's an ongoing process. And so every time we get an opportunity, as soon as we've gone beyond that level of things happening to us and they're either happening for us or through us, we're able to say, okay, this is a challenge. It's an opportunity to grow. It doesn't automatically become this um, sort of blanket calamity that we've got no way of seeing our way through, which isn't to say that these things can't be truly challenging. They can be truly terrifying as well. It's the mindset, though, to be able to see it as an opportunity and to recognize that if it's not literally life threatening at that moment, there will be an opportunity to grow from it at some point in the future.
Mm. Oh, wow. So um, take it the challenge as an opportunity to grow as a person.
Yeah, I guess you could think of the whole picture of self awareness and resilience as, you know, the roof and pillars of your life. So you have self awareness, you have self regulation, self motivation, social support, and these are the pillars that support this roof of personal awareness, inner strength, personal resilience.
Yeah, yeah, got it. And now you've been helping a lot of people. I've got also experience that yeah, some kind of challenge and etc in life. Now, as a mentor, as a coach, um, how can actually the self awareness help people recognize and use their strength, when facing the difficulty in life? Because I think it's not easy to realize this, and to take this as an opportunity for people, for all the people who's watching the this conversation too.
Yeah. Well, there's probably another pillar to supporting that roof, which is reflection and learning. And we all need to recognize that there are some fundamental truths in life. There are things that we just cannot control. And there are things that through experience and education we can learn to control. So Viktor Frankl's often quoted in ecology, as you know, the gap between reaction and response, which allows us to determine how we are going to approach a situation. And that in itself, the fact that nobody can remove our choice about how we respond, being one of the tenets of what it is to be human. So recognizing what it is that is within our control. So thinking of intrinsic, extrinsic factors, focusing on the elements that we can influence for our better, but also accepting that there are, even if we can influence them, they might not necessarily be for our or somebody else's better. um, Acknowledging and addressing and accepting our fears and recognizing the difference between problem solving. Um, I mentioned earlier about pinch points and pain points being the opportunities for us to recognize that there's a place for us to grow, and recognizing the difference between navel gazing, being very introspective about our problems, and actually being task focused, solution focused. That allows us to manage our stress, to create plans around our stress. And it is those that lead to our development of healthy adaptive techniques. And by that, I mean those sorts of problem solving behaviors rather than ones that tend to magnify our problems. For instance, drug or alcohol use, or could quite literally just be burying our heads in the sand. So it's all about promoting healthy coping strategies.
Okay, so it's all about healthy coping strategies, such as acknowledging the fears, or problem solving, etc., that you've just mentioned about.
Exactly. Focusing on the things that we can change in a healthy way, um, and being prepared to accept that this requires work. We know on the personal growth and self development journey, it's ongoing and it doesn't necessarily always come easily. So, in the same way that resilience is not a fixed character trait, we don't really reach a final part of self actualization unless, I suppose, we become enlightened grandmaster of something. But our paths will always continue to put challenges in the way, and it is on us to decide how we want to deal with those. If they call us external distress, as Marcus Aurelius said, we've got that power within us to remove that immediately, because it is the way we think about it. So, another often quoted person in ecology is Virginia Satir. The problem often is not the problem; it's the way we think about the problem that is the
Yeah,
problem.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Oh gosh, this is a very common in life. Sometimes we just focusing on something else, just focusing on the problem, but
Yeah,
forgot what is that we can work on in ourselves.
and realistically, we only have that, don't we? Yeah, we have people around us who we can rely on to a greater or lesser
Ooh.
extent. But if you're thinking about raw material, in terms of change, it is only that which we have within ourselves, or that which we can immediately place our hands on. And I kind of find that hopeful, really, because if we're able to pass that message, and if we're able to educate people that they are part of their own solutions, any of those sort of horror stories that are promoted in the news, whether it be conflict or sustainability, um, any of the sort of headline grabbing things, when people recognize that they are part of the solution and they have a choice in how much of the problem they actually are, that
Yeah,
gives me hope.
yeah. In yeah, yeah. I agree with that. It's just like sometimes people are you know uh, dependent on someone else, something else, material things, and
Yeah,
oh my gosh, and yeah, forgetting how to grow the person as the
yeah.
person that I want to be,
Yeah, and
isn't it?
we have reached a stage in the world where um, people are used and things are loved. I think it was the Dalai Lama that said this, and we need to find our way back to a place where people are loved and things are used, and not in a use it and throw it away sense, but used as in that is the sole amount of value. It's a tool or something that helps us with our day to day. But this commercial, very particularly Western, but it seems now to be global obsession with ownership and um, I'm probably making myself sound quite socialist here, which isn't the intent, but it's the people. that are the important part, and we need to really recognise that. Um, and people come with their own problems. You've mentioned
Yeah.
already about the way we think about things and our emotional regulation. But some of that regulation goes with the over attachment, this conspicuous consumerism that we have, where everybody wants to be seen to have, you know, these things. And I know that's a massive generalisation. It's not everybody, but it brings us to some of those CBT schools. So, always looking on the dark side, being cynical, assuming that all things will always go wrong all the time, personalising an event, um, you're making up the story to fit facts or finding facts to fit a story, all of which are very much problematic styles of thinking. And again, what I feel my role is to help people recognise the problematic thinking styles, and once again to move those with solution focus to their desired state, little plug of my business name, but not not focusing on what we don't want,
Yeah.
and what we have, very much like the skilled helper model, identifying the root problem, recognizing what we have and what situation we're currently in, what we would like instead, and then how are we going to move ourselves to the state that we've identified.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow. Um, that's a lot. That is behind of the desired state that you build as your business now. It's you really want to help people also to know, using the skill helping idea and strategies in there.
yeah,
Um, and what about, talking about the self awareness also and the individual self? What is and in what ways does self awareness actually help individuals accept their weakness and the limitation? Because this is, I can tell, well, we're in ecology, we know that, we learn about it, but we want to actually help people.
yes.
And you know that in what ways actually the self awareness itself.
Right at the outset, I mentioned curiosity and the
Yeah,
willingness. So it's a fundamental tenet that in order to help someone, they have to be open and receptive and respectful, not of the coach or the mentor, but respectful of their circumstances and their abilities to change. Um, so you mentioned weakness. So I mean that's a great uh, example of where we would look at reframing. So learning about our thinking patterns, what would cause me to think myself weak? Obviously, that would be quite a disempowering place to come from. So, recognizing that personal responsibility breeds personal empowerment, we learn about our thinking patterns, we can use all sorts of techniques to recognize how they're helping us, and these can be kind of immediate processes that we run through, or we could journal on the way we have been thinking about things and how it makes us feel. And then we challenge our thinking. Is it objectively true? Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it important? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And the big one for almost everybody is replacing the negative self talk, replacing that inner critic with either a reference group of, thinking of that, you're the sum of the five people closest to you. replacing the voice of that inner critic with voices of maturity and character, people who are always going to think the best of you, um, from the NLP presuppositions, basically trying to absorb into our inner psyche, our inner world, those people that are actually going to help and guide and support our progress, rather than those critics that have always been um, very severe, lacking in compassion, however it is. Um, but ultimately, changing that negative self talk, having a reference group or an individual who speaks to us from a place of wisdom and kindness, until such point as we are able, in our own mind, without any reference to anybody else, to reach that wise mind place where we're not driven by external events, or kind of owned by our internal events. And everything that we tackle from, again, keep saying it, a place of wisdom and maturity.
Yeah. Mm. Oh, I think I experienced that, the inner critic inside of me, and to exchange into the voice, maturity, and character, it need long process for me. First of all, the curiosity that you've just mentioned. I think, but not a lot of people actually curious. Well, it's not actually going there, but you know what? It's like it's not as simple as it is, to realize how to be curious in how changing and shifting that inner critic into the maturity and character. Alec, how do you see from
um,
that?
there's an old poem, Rudyard Kipling. It gets abbreviated these days to the five WH questions, but as a young police officer, I was taught it as a poem, and it's: I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I know. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. And I've probably misquoted that, but it's a learned ability. Or rather, it's a remembered ability, because if you think of a child, they are absolutely ultimately curious. They are sponges. They want to pick everything up. Even a tiny baby will sort of like feel and hold and squeeze and even put things in their mouths to
Oh yeah.
get the sensation. And it's something that is kind of removed from us by societal conditioning. Don't ask questions, just do as you're told. This
Oh
is the
yeah.
way it is.
Hmm.
It's like that, and that's the way it is, which I think was a song. Or even from parents, just because. Why? Just because. So it is just really a case of returning to our inherent curiosity, remembering to ask those questions, um, and really those are the only way to find out whether something is objectively true. So we could think of that as Socratic questioning, or um, evidence-based questioning. But ultimately, without truth as a capital T, we are just working with stories and programming, and we will only ever be able to make the best of in those circumstances. Whereas if we have an objective truth, um, it may not be comfortable. We may find any number of difficulties with that itself, but it ultimately brings us to a place where our identity, our beliefs, our values are able to be built on something of substance, and then we can make informed life decisions about what we want to do around this thing. And not everything that challenges our resilience is alterable, and that's one of those things that we have to acknowledge and accept. So resilience might include just outright acceptance or adaptation to something that cannot be changed. Although, by being curious and by finding an objective truth with a capital T, we might find that it's something we want to put boundaries around. It might be something that isn't actually true and can then be changed by the group dynamics, the force of will, maybe even as much as changing governments. I suggest we do that in a peaceful way. Um, but if we don't have that objective truth, everything else tends to be built on shaky foundations. It's much easier to be kind to yourself, to find time to relax, to develop interests and spend time on the things that you want to be doing, to build supportive relationships and to identify things that cause any kind of internal distress if you're working from a place of objective truth, security, and solid foundations.
Oh, wow. So it's not every challenges is actually resilience to here, and there's also I would say it sounds like limiting beliefs that prevent us to be curious as a person.
Yeah, I mean, there will be an awful lot of meta programming, childhood stuff, things that go back even through ancestral lines. I'm
Yeah.
not talking here in a spiritual sense. Things that have been handed down to our parents by their parents and their parents before them
Mm,
as a belief, which fundamentally is not true. So, in a more global kind of modern applied psychology understanding, that could be money mindset. It could be beliefs about the family's weight and height and shape, and they will be things that we spend probably most of our lives believing and accepting, and which we have never thought to question or challenge. So yes, limiting beliefs, um, but with that comes all the ways that we know of challenging those. And actually, our limiting beliefs might only be two or three major. Um, I like to think of them as warpy thoughts. Things that um, are waterlogged and swollen and sit in our minds like something that um, yeah, just holds us and bogs us down. So they're a very small part of this huge picture that we have as people, and even tackling just two or maybe three small elements of our thinking can make a change, as Kane would say, for anything up to a lifetime. We're only ever that one perspective shift away from potentially permanent change for the better.
okay. Oof, big one here. Even curious for me. And talking about that, this kind of resilient self-awareness and etc. that we just talk about here. Do you have any like personal story that we can learn from you about the story that where the self-awareness actually help yourself to develop the inner strength and the resilience?
um, yes, I can share a little bit. I'd like to think that your people resonate more with what I'm able to say and describe from where I am now. Um, However, Our authority, our expertise, our experience is judged by what we have tackled ourselves. So I was over 30 years in the UK emergency services. I was first person on scene to a number of major incidents, some of which made national and international headlines. And my career came to an abrupt end, having been assaulted on duty. Um, Over a period of some time, it became apparent that that assault had led to me developing a paraspinal abscess. So I ended up with a compressed spinal cord from C5, which is basically the bottom of your skull, down to T5, which would sit on your spine, sort of basically somewhere behind your breastbone. And I was faced with permanent paralysis, uh, lost the ability to run or walk, and ultimately ended up having around about 14 inches of surgical instrumentation. Some of my vertebrae don't have any backs on them at all. They're bolted into place. Sorry, I can see this is making you a bit squeamish. And when I joined ecology, I I was in a wheelchair. I was having to learn to walk again. I was going through the process of being medically retired because, as you can imagine, this had a massive impact on my own mental health as well. And yeah, really, when I joined ecology back in January of 21, I was Kane's train wreck. I was that person who he was deep in some self pity, feeling very much a victim of my career, my circumstances. And, I worked through the Western medical model and was ultimately told the way you are now is what you have got to live with for the rest of your life. And I then did a cane course and was told, um, whatever's happened, whether mum and dad didn't love you enough or whether you suffered a trauma, it's up to you to do
Yeah.
something about it. Pull on your big boy pants and do something about it. And, I don't mind saying that I found that first course and cane confrontational until I'd completed the first course, developed that curiosity and openness and receptiveness, realised that he was really on to something. And of course, it's not just Kane, there's a whole history of, Stoics and psychologists going back a couple of thousand years. Although personally, I find the way he voices this accumulated knowledge very useful. I definitely resonate with his presentation, and it changed absolutely everything. Ecology changed absolutely everything, and I suppose you could say it was being made aware and having my eyes opened to self awareness, personal growth, self development that changed everything. But it wouldn't have happened without Kane, without ecology, without the members, the community. So it was life saving, life altering, and yeah, here I am. Uh,
Oh,
so there's a theory about stress tolerance. We all have the capacity to withstand life's pressures. I suppose much in the same way that Carl Rogers talked about everybody having within them the ability to change and grow and shape their futures. And stress tolerance is just about this capacity to endure pressures, uncertainty, um, hostile circumstances or events uh, without becoming negative to oneself or to others. So, compassion and the people who have a high degree of stress tolerance can withstand and even thrive in conditions that could potentially make others crumble or may have even made them crumble in years past. So that's where I've found myself. I've realized that I have developed a high degree of stress tolerance. I can rise to challenges and even things that initially may still stop me dead in my tracks. Um, no longer have that ability to completely derail me. And and this is something we can still learn from others. People hopefully will be able to learn from me and my story. There are definitely still people in the world who are um, giving me lessons in stress tolerance, resilience, inner strength, um, because there are always people who are experiencing something now in the present that has the ability to make us reflect on how we might adapt or overcome that problem, or who provide inspiration to us to reach deep within and exercise those muscles of self-awareness, curiosity, inner strength, and personal resilience.
Mm. That's long journey, that it's kind of big challenges in your life. And yeah, absolutely, I can totally agree that even though we experience a lot of things, but we also learn from people who has the challenges in the present, and stuff like that. But now, um it's not many people, of course, facing a lot of challenge at the same time, and anything, right? And what about, and how can you help, or individuals actually practice the self-awareness daily to improve their inner strength and the resilience, from all of the challenges and experience that you have?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There are times in our lives where we might experience a perfect storm of uh, calamities, catastrophes that really any one of them might cause us to reach into our resilience tool bags. But one of the main things is that resilience doesn't mean struggling on alone. It doesn't mean not having the vulnerability to say that you need help or that you are struggling. And there are plenty of early on I referenced Van der Kolk and his definition of trauma, but within his studies, there's also evidence of what social support does for us, whether that be in some kind of global calamity or whether it just be something that is in fact impacting on the individual. And one of the things that is key in that is the fact that the person is heard and seen. So in ecology and other sort of personal growth areas, we talk about holding space, and being able to do that for someone might just offer them, even in the perfect storm, the space that they need to be able to respond rather than to react to an event. But you also mentioned quite rightly making something in our daily practice. So gratitude, humility, um, mindfulness are all elements that go into this resilience picture. Um, in the same way that it's not a fixed character trait, neither is it a standalone thing. Resilience isn't just something you go and get from the shop in a bar.
Mm,
It
yeah.
it comes like one of those horrendous. I know some people enjoy doing these things, so it's a personal judgment. But one of these flat pack kind of desks that you put together, um, all of the bits and pieces that go to create this structure that we call resilience come from other exercises and other practices. So already I mentioned, mindfulness and gratitude, humility,
Gratitude.
those sorts of things. The more whole we have become as a person on our growth journey, the greater our ability to spread that stress around, which is part of the stress tolerance, which is part of our reaction to um, an external factor that causes us to need to exercise this resilience. So if we went back to the analogy of it being a house, um, we have the self awareness, the regulation, we added reflection and learning, um, the individual's self motivation, um, and that pillar of social support. So we talk in ecology, don't we, about self awareness, social awareness, responsibility, and then uh, yeah, so we move into not only having our own routines for tolerance and resilience, but then also being able to share and assist others through similar situations. And none of our experiences are ever identical. We could be in the same traumatic incident and we would view them differently, which means that techniques that I've used through my personal experiences are translatable to others. They don't have to be identical, and I don't have to understand the full gravity. Other than that, it had this particular effect. Um, so, in the same way that we can talk to a client and not have experienced identically the thing that they bring to us, it's the same with patterns of trauma, crisis, catastrophe. There will be similar elements, and all we need to do is help the individual to find those coping strategies that will allow them to continue. Certainly for parents, that means that those coping strategies are impacting and hopefully helping their children. And
Yeah.
once again, we have this ripple effect where it can spread through communities and societies.
Mm. And you mentioned about the groups and the community, and related with the personal development and self awareness. Um, well, I'm not talking about judgment or things like that, but
Mm.
I remember one quote that show me your friends and I'll tell you your future. I don't know if you heard about that quote. So, about the community and group, what kind of group and community you were talking about? Because, well, I can have a group, a big group. For example, if I've been, for example, I want to be enjoy. I face a very difficult challenge in my life. I just want to have fun. It's nothing wrong with that. It's about personal thing.
Yeah.
So what kind of group and community or things that you mentioned about this case?
Well, it kind of depends on whether we're talking about somebody exercising individual resilience. So,
Mm,
as we said about the sum of the five people closest to you, um, also being able to have this internalized reference group that helps you with self awareness and growth, whether that be resilience or in other directions. But then there's the more global impact where perhaps an entire community is affected by fire, fire, uh, famine, flood, these kind of uh, perhaps more natural events. And we know from science, from studies, and from anthropology that communities that that do best um, work together. They share the communal healing as well as the communal trauma. And I think you're aware that I do some work with traumatic risk management with a company
Yeah.
called Strongmind, and they, trim as it's called, is peer to peer delivered. So it has been shown that um, this shared experience, so particularly with the military, that's where trim originated, and through King's College London, but with the ambulance service, so it would be delivered paramedic to paramedic or other clinical level, um, and even within small teams that have experienced something maybe within the police service or the fire service. And it's the fact that it's peer led, and these people already have an understanding not only of the situation that you went through, but of the other elements that go into it. So,
Mm,
frontline emergency service roles kind of take over your entire life. Um, and so, you kind of need to have had some understanding of that yourself, um, so that you can recognize where there's this trickling effect into other elements of your life. So we could do this within ecology as colleagues, peer to peer, because we are having shared experience, shared knowledge, shared situations.
yeah.
So um, one example of that would potentially be when people are working with clients outside. So, if you are a Samaritan in the UK or one of these other frontline crisis kind of intervention teams, you will have a shared experience. So you wouldn't necessarily be talking about an individual case, but you would know that in certain situations, these types of emotions, these sorts of responses come up, and we can then talk in a more informed way with those people because we've had similar experience. And that is what scales out to things like natural disasters. So getting small groups talking, as long as somebody's not excessively distressed in some kind of psychotic break or crisis, speaking in small groups about a shared experience is almost always beneficial.
Okay. So it depends on the person here, and
Yeah. So there's an element of appraising the event,
yeah.
appraising how it has influenced the people within the event, thinking about how you're going to help them to talk about and process the event, um, and that conversation, um, it can't alter the facts of an event, but it does allow us to process what we believe about
Yeah.
an event. Um,
Mm,
and in almost all cases, it is the lack of ability to connect to social support, to connect to um, some kind of talking therapy, the lack of processing that leads to long term psychological distress.
right. Oof. Um. Yeah. Going back to the well, before that, so do you think actually the group or friends is actually impacting the feature of the person?
I suppose the people you're around can influence the way you continue to behave. So,
Yeah.
the things that we can control are our attitudes, our actions, and our behaviors.
Yeah.
So, if you remain in a toxic relationship, If
Yeah.
you continue with maladaptive behaviours, you mentioned, I think, someone who wants to go out and party and have fun because they've experienced, yeah, that is a stress release. If it
Yeah.
becomes a maladaptive coping strategy and it's encouraged by a small group,
Mm.
then yes, I mean, you can almost certainly predict at least the possible outcome that the person isn't going to process it, and
Yeah.
alcohol, drugs, lack of sleep, all of those sorts of things tend to act as a lens to anything that is going on for us. So, uh, without wanting to sort of, uh, there's a place to relax, to have fun, to recognize that you have survived something. The Stoics talk about memento mori, the fact that anything that makes us reflect on death, so
Yeah.
near misses, accidents, those sorts of things, should also cause us to celebrate life. So things like that hopefully help us to have a reverence for life, for our own lives. So being able to use any of these things, um, it might even be the catalyst that helps somebody to develop that curiosity and to begin a journey of personal growth and development. Um, and I think that was probably my case. I ended up in this kind of perfect storm of physical health, mental health collapsing, um, very much isolated, very little social support, not in contact with my peers and colleagues within the emergency services. And without doubt, those things became the catalyst that led to me joining ecology, entering into the member journey, helping to develop other ecologists, definitely developing myself along the way, huge amounts of study, um, you know, more client interaction than I can shake a stick at, really. And none of that would have come without the adversity. And that's something that's worth remembering. You cannot demonstrate resilience without adversity to first stimulate it. Um, so it's almost a latent ability. We may have done those things that help us to develop resilience that we've already talked about, but they would remain latent abilities until such time as there is adversity to test them.
Mm. So, is this how does the self reflection actually help individuals to become the inner strength and resilience? This is.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can look back over your life at areas that you feel that you've struggled with, but you overcame, and you can identify not only things that worked well for you, but you can identify things that perhaps if I had a similar struggle in the future, I would do this differently. Um, and sometimes it's the things that we would change for the better that reflect our growth best. Because let's face it, if everything is easy to you and you never have to struggle to overcome something, you could argue whether or not there's there's growth because you're not moving on from a position. And fantastic if you are somebody that takes everything in your stride and it never comes back to bother you at some point in the future, then more power to you. But you're also not being given that opportunity to grow by recognizing where something could have gone differently, been better, more, or different, to steal a phrase from one of my dear friends. um, so self-reflection is absolutely one of those pillars, um, for resilience and inner strength.
Wow, wow. Interesting one. And now, as a leader and mentor, how can you promote self awareness and resilience in others, especially both, personally and professionally?
For most of us, this will come through being a role model, presenting ourselves out into the world, sharing our stories, and um, obviously focusing on those stories being ones of healing and growth and development of knowledge and character and hopefully some wisdom along the way. So obviously removing any kind of sharing of the story from a victim mindset or a woe am I because this happened. Um, so positive role modeling, and people can either become curious about that and seek out individuals, whether they be ecologists or from other areas of the world, who they resonate with, whose stories mean something to them, and who they feel that they can learn from. So I think being a presence and showing what is able to be achieved in just a quiet way uh, is probably one of the best gifts that we can give people. Um, Following on from that, promoting ourselves perhaps professionally or within social groups and other forms of media, so that people are aware that these are acts of education and understanding that have led to these kinds of growth. And really, that's all we need to do as individuals to be able to influence the collective.
Perfect one. Um, Last thing now, about the resilience. What is one message do you have for someone struggling to develop the self awareness or inner strength during the challenging time in life? For people who's watching our video today, anyone.
I would say the key message is don't struggle alone. Um, we need to find balance in our view of um, self reliance, which really is what we're talking about with resilience. It is being able to rely on ourselves. However, that doesn't mean that we can't ask for help, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't show that we are at a vulnerable point in our lives. Um, so, asking for help, acknowledging the situation that you're in and addressing it, learning about your thinking patterns, I would say are probably the most basic and fundamental steps that somebody can take, particularly on a journey that leads them to more understanding about stress tolerance, more understanding about inner strength, and therefore personal resilience.
Wow, don't struggle alone. You can ask for help because honestly, I personally have this kind of experience. Like, no, I don't want to tell anybody that I'm struggle because I'm shy. I'm ashamed. That kind of limiting beliefs that actually holding me back. So I don't want to get help or to talk to other people. And especially, it's hard to actually trusting people.
Yeah.
And don't struggle alone means that we can seek to the professional or the person who we can trust, or which one?
I would say someone you trust in the first instance, and hopefully, if you are placing your trust in the correct person, they will be able to identify whether they are the right person to help you, or they can signpost you to somebody else, whether that be mainstream help or whether it be ecologists workshops, other talking sort of therapies, but really education and signposting to help. Um, and yeah, I guess a certain amount of willingness from that person that you have trusted. Um, and don't give up. If and I don't mean in the sense of just don't give up, but you might not necessarily always get the support or the help you need from the first person that you speak to, but even voicing it once will not only allow you to hear how you're reflecting on a situation, but it will probably give you some insight and understanding into exactly what sort of help you need. Um, because unless we start to talk about the thing that is bothering us, going back to Virginia Satir, if we don't identify that the problem isn't the problem, it's the way we're thinking about the problem, and that 9 times out of 10 will not happen if we are just going round and round with cyclical um, thinking patterns. Einstein told us that you can't solve a problem from the same place that it was created. And if
Yeah.
that problem is being created in our own thinking, then we definitely won't come up with a solution with our own thinking. We need to voice it and have somebody reflect it back to us and make sure that we are both able to understand what we think the problem is, so that we can then have um, solution focused ideas, which may well come from the individual, because when you start to speak about these things, if you're coming from a wise mind perspective, as you talk about the things, you start to realize, okay, this is what needs to be in place for that not to be a problem for me, my family, or others.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alex, for your share. It's so, oh my God, insightful. I learned a lot from you. Thank you so much. And yeah, indeed, learning from the thinking patterns, it's something that, and also careers if you want to start the self-awareness. Thank you so much for your insight, Alec.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me, and thank
Oh
you
my God, it's
to
my pleasure.
anybody that manages to sit through the whole conversation.
Yeah, and thank you so much for all of you who's watching our video today. And yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Alec.
Thanks. Bye.